Hello everyone, my name is Trish McCabe and welcome to Conversations from the School of Hard Knocks. This is a podcast where people from all walks of life will be sharing their stories and the wisdom they have gained from their life experiences. In no way is this show offering any kind of advice or counsel. These conversations will be of a very sensitive nature, so please be respectful in your comments and thank you for watching. Hello everyone, my name is Trish and welcome to Conversations from the School of Hard Knocks. Today I'm going to be discussing the topic of recovery from covert narcissistic abuse. My guest I have here today is Rob with NPD Survivors Limited, here to talk about his experiences. Hi Rob, thank you for joining me.
Hello, how are you doing, Trisha?
Great. I'm so happy to be doing this.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me onto your show.
The first question that I'm just going to ask to get the ball rolling here is, what was your first experience that you can recall thinking back now that you know what narcissistic abuse is, or covert narcissistic abuse? What was the beginning? What was the first time that happened to you that, in looking back, really affected you and the choices that you made in your life and that sort of thing?
Well, it actually goes all the way back to childhood. Once you start digging into your, why you attract these certain people, types of people into your life. And I didn't really know specifically, that, people have different traits that are not healthy, like, lying or manipulation or whatever. And you just see it for that. You take it for face value. I didn't really even know what it was until, I divorced one and started researching. I was researching during the marriage, trying to figure it out, back in, 2007, 8, and 9, trying to figure out, what the heck was going on. My wife was changing and things were so different. We were only married for a short time. And just under 3 years before I had to file for divorce from the craziness. And, during that process, I was trying to put all the pieces together. And back then, there was not the awareness as there is now, thank God, with all Facebook groups and books. And, there's psychotherapists. There's even attorneys that specialize in dealing with people with narcissistic personality disorder. And so it was basically a culmination of just kind of growing along and trying to read books. The first book that I read, because the lying was just going, it was crazy. I was pitching my ex-wife like all these crazy lies. I'm like, what? You don't have to lie. Why are you lying for that? And so it was a book called People of the Lie. I don't remember the author, but I was reading it and I'm like, because I like to figure things out, and solve problems and move forward, and we got stuck, man. It didn't go anywhere. I was like, hey, let's talk. And, I tried to save the marriage and it was no go. I mean, might as well talk to a wall, because when you understand how the disorder works, with people that have this, they don't take accountability. It's like a wall that they've built, and they've created a false self for themselves, and they don't want that false self to be targeted or attacked in any way. It's their fragile false self that they have when they deny their real self, and that comes from abuse from childhood. And my ex-wife told me the abuse that she had to go through. Physical, a lot of slapping from both sides of the parents. And her parents were, the first time we met them when we were dating, she's like, okay, they may sound like they're fighting, but they're not. They're just speaking it. It comes from an Italian background. They're just speaking Italian. It's the way they communicate. Yeah, it's part of the culture, Later, I found out that was not true. They were off the rails with each other. I mean, we'd go to public events and they were, you know, I mean, we'd have birthday parties and stuff or whatever at our house, and then they would just be at it in public, and it was so like inappropriate. And, you know, it's like embarrassing for everyone to like have to deal with that. And so then later, you know, I find out that, you know, like no one wanted, because they were seniors, and she's passed on, her mother passed on, but they didn't want to go on vacations with them because they fought so much. So that was a typical upbringing for her, you know. And you know, I didn't have foresight at the time. You know, I waited a little bit later in life to get married. I was 36, and so I just took it for what it was. It's like, you know, someone, you know, says something like, oh, okay. You know, you don't think someone's kind of trying to hide or manipulate anything. You know, you don't think anyone's got some sort of crazy personality disorder. You just, you know, you're like, oh, no one's perfect, whatever. You just kind of work with things. You know, you can't be, you know, too rigid with it. And so that's from my experience, from where it started coming out from, was during that process of learning and reading books and going and Googling stuff. And, you know, I mean, back then it was, you know, 2008 was so minimal with information. It was basically, I think we had Borders books and Barnes and Nobles was, you know, there. And so I would just go into these sections of psychology and self-help, just trying to figure out things to save the marriage, because I put everything into it. You know, I had I bought my own house by myself, and I had my own business. I still do, whatever. But, you know, I put all my eggs in one basket. I never had any previous marriages. I didn't have a plan B. I was like, if you have a plan B, then you're not fully into it, whatever. And so, yeah, I was all in, man. And I wanted to work things out, but it was so tough trying
Toxic.
trying to break down that wall. It's like, look, I love you, man. I mean, we have a child together. It's like, you know, Christian was like 1 at the time. And so, it was so hard. I mean, and then
That's
it's
when
a
you
long story, but let me tell you,
the
reason I'm
covert
on here
part,
is
right?
I don't want anyone else to go through this. And this is the thing with NPD, is that there's 2 types: the overt, which is more, you know, outwardly expressed. You can kind of tell a person that's selfish and into themselves. And then there's the covert one, the sneaky one. That's what I had to deal with, and still dealing with it, actually, because we have a child together, and he's 14. So, but yeah, this is I you know, it's a disorder that flies below the radar, because, you know, like I said before, there's a false self and a real self, and that false self is like charming, talkative. You know, there's mirroring that goes on. You know, that you know, salespeople. She's actually been sales her whole life, and so it's. But
the word that comes to mind is manipulation.
It's like psychological manipulation. You know, and I was, you know, I was always kind of give everyone the benefit of the doubt in life, you know, and I'm, you know, it's face value, and you're like, okay, and that's the way most of the population is. You know, they're like, oh, okay, that person's kind of like that, give them some time. And, you know, we dated for 6.5 years before I proposed. You know, I did it the old school way and asked her parents first, and went to the beach and whatever, and proposed. And but I didn't know. I knew she had a lying problem before, but I didn't know how wild this ride would be when you try to leave a narcissist, and you're like, hey man, I can't do this anymore. This is crazy. I mean, even though I had all my eggs in the basket, things were going crazy. She started starting fights, calling the police. You know, we lived in this nice neighborhood in Huntington Beach, and people are, you know, it looks like you know, it was like a freaking war zone over there. And, you know, it takes 2 to tango.
Can you give me an example of like an event that happened before you decided you wanted to get the divorce that led you to get the divorce, but a specific event and what exactly happened that you were going, wow, this is what's going on here? Anything specific?
There was a few events, you know. I mean, we were married, we had a kid, and we had a, you know, nice home and a couple rental properties. We're doing good. But that's the thing with people with NPD is they're bored all the time. They always need some sort of entertainment. They always need, they're never fulfilled. They have this empty thing that they're always trying to fulfill and get validation from outside sources, no matter what it is, positive, even negative validation, as long as they're like, hey, I'm valid, because they didn't get that in their childhood. And so they go through their whole lives in this same dysfunctional cycle, hopping from person to person, and trying to get supply. And that's not just, romantic relationships, that's family, friendships, whatever. And so that void is never filled. And I was trying to figure out, I'm like, what does this woman want? I mean, she's got a dedicated husband, had a good business, at that time, and I still do, and brought money in. I had plans and goals, and I had Christian. I mean, before he was born, I had an account for him set aside for his, for his college, and so I was planning and putting everything together, and I thought I had a teammate, but I didn't have a teammate. I had someone that was trying to compete with me all the time. And when I would try to talk to her about things, when you asked about specific events, it was stonewalling. I'm like, she just didn't want to open up, and maybe, they can't act. The thing is they don't have a very high emotional intelligence. And that's been known, in part of our groups that we're part of for the survivors, that they can relate with fear very well. They can relate with anger very well. They can relate with envy, jealousy. These are all low frequency emotions, and it's a protective mechanism that was,
Developed from
brought about by
childhood.
childhood abuse. So when I would try to talk to her about these things, it was just like she couldn't open up. She didn't. I'm like, hey, and she couldn't reach in that part of the emotions. She was blocked off. And then later I found out she was, picking up people on a married website for people that like to cheat that are married. So they sneak around and they email back each other back and forth and have these little trysts on the side. And I'm like, God, you just had a baby, like, what was it, like a year ago? And I guess that wasn't. So now basically what happened was the focus wasn't all on her anymore. It was like, now she was married and with a child. And I was like, gosh, that's what she wants. Her friends, she had a couple friends that had, they were on their second and third kids by that time. And so I'm like, okay, that's just kind of wrote for her background. I'm like, okay, everything's cool. I didn't know. I had no idea that when I tried to get behind that wall, that all the sparks would fly. And then everything would be projected back onto me. Like I was the bad guy when I was trying to figure things out, And yeah, it was crazy. She would call the cops and say, I've got a restraining order. And we've never fought, we never did anything physical. And she's like a black belt in Taekwondo anyway. So,
and that every time you tried to discuss her behavior, or her reaction to things or whatever, you'd be like, what's going on? What?
Yeah.
And then she wouldn't answer the question because she didn't.
Yeah. She started sleeping on the other side of the house, our guest bedroom. And she would just shut off. And I was like, what's going on? I didn't get it, and it got to a point to where I was like, I didn't want to come home from work,
And it was, it was a pattern that anytime, she would have a reaction to something that you're saying or doing, and you'd ask her what that reaction was about, or try to have a discussion about it, she would just get defensive. And
I don't think maybe she didn't know how to access that part of her. And like I said, we dated for a long time, and I knew that there was kind of always walls there, but I didn't know how severe it was. And the whole cheating thing, that's to get it's called narcissistic supply, attention, And it's not about the cheating, it's about something else. It's about getting external validation. I'm like, because the validation from my husband and the immediate people, that's not enough. They start feeling empty and they start going wild. And I did all I could to try and save it. And then she was calling the police, and then they're like, no, there's no restraining order. She did it 2 times. It was crazy. And then she'd run across to the other side of the friggin' the neighbor's house and stuff. And then all along, what they do is called a smear campaign. And so then they make up their own reality, and then they start to make you look bad. So now they don't believe you when you're trying to explain what went on. It's just crazy. So, but anyways, there was some, I wanted to, so people don't end up in the same predicament, and have to deal with this, especially getting married with children. It gets to be very bad because they don't stop attacking. You're like the worst person in the world, and you try to placate and try to do what you can, and it sucks all the energy out of you to try and live your own life as normal as possible. So the main signs, I wrote some signs down. The first one, actually, for me, I noticed was she was lying to her parents all the time. She was the only child, and her parents, she had to call her parents every day. I mean, she was in her 30s, and we'd be like vacationing in Vegas or Hawaii somewhere, and she'd be like, okay, Rob, be quiet, because we weren't married yet, right? So the virgin, right? So the lying was, she said they were strict and whatever, and so she had an excuse why she lied to them. I'm like, okay, that's kind of creepy and weird that you call them all the time, every day, and lying on top of it. So I just kind of let that go. But the lying, and this is a thing that once they start opening the floodgates and you're like the enemy to them, I'm still not an enemy. I just think she's, off the rails. That the lying will get crazy. It's like pathological, like all these stories are made and they play the victim. They like flip the whole script on it, and you're like going, what the heck's going on here? And so lying, pathological lying is a definite sign to watch out for. If you're dating someone that has that problem,
It's a sign
get the heck out of there.
of a
You don't want any
toxic.
of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Selfishness is another one that I wrote down. You'll see it like when we were dating, she was to just get all the good stuff for her, maybe a little thing for me, and I'd be like, what's up with that? But I was secure in myself. I'm like, whatever, she's just kind of doing that stuff. Or she'd go on vacations with like her groups of friends that we'd all hang out together, and she's like, oh yeah, we're going over here, but like not invite me. And I'm like, oh, it's kind of weird, and it's all just my girlfriends. Then you find out later, oh no, it was a whole group that went, guys and girls, so who knows what the heck she was doing. So I thought that was kind of weird. I mean, in the 6.5 years, she probably went on like a dozen, Puerto Vallarta, friggin' Vegas, I don't know, half a dozen times. But I was like, okay, that's cool. You want to play that? That's fine. So I took it. And that's part of the thing. Another thing I want to talk about is why I took some of these things that, like, here and there is no big deal, not a control freak or anything, but there's a level where it gets to be disrespectful. That's not cool. And that's where I started doing my own personal digging and finding out I had all these codependency issues from my childhood, that I was kind of like primed for a toxic person later, and definitely, and it kept happening even after my divorce. I would still,
Can you give me an example of that? What, like like a thing that happened when you were younger that sort of played into that?
Sure.
A situation.
My parents, I was grew up here in Southern California, regular kids, skateboarding and music and everything. And still, but, my parents divorced when I was 10. And then my dad remarried when I was like, I think 13 or something. And I went to go live with my dad because that's where the drums were. Not that my mom, but I think she was getting tired of me too. So But you know, there was my parents fought too, so that didn't give me a very good template. And they have a template from their parents, so it goes generationally down the line.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that's where the understanding comes in, to where you know, you got to have forgiveness. It's like, I love my parents dearly, you know, and then my dad remarried to my stepmom. I love her too. No one's perfect, but what happened was, you know, they had their own issues, and I didn't feel very loved growing up, you know, and I wasn't abused physically, you know, but it was kind of like, you know, and then, you know, my parents were baby boomers, so it was like a seen and not be heard, you know,
Yeah.
type of parenting thing. And
Yes.
you're just kind of like, okay, do whatever, you know. And so, and that was okay. You know, I grew up with it, but you know, I wish that there was a little more love there, you know, genuine, but, you know, no
And so
one's
that
perfect.
made you codependent, or
Yeah,
it got you
that made
set
me
on the
feel
road.
less than, yes, that made me codependent, made me less, made me just kind of placate to people with, like, subconsciously. You're just like, you know, even with friendships, you know, and whatever groups of people, bands you play in or whatever, you're
Looking
just
for
kind of like,
validation and acceptance, that kind of
acceptance, you
things.
know, maybe you didn't get growing up or whatever. And so you're still just you're still in that mode. And that's the same thing like with my ex-wife. She's still playing out that same role from way back, trying to, you know, heal those old wounds and move forward. And, you know, and it wasn't until I really started digging in that I found these things. And I thank God for Ross Rosenberg, because he's a psychologist out of, forgot where he's out of, somewhere on the East Coast, I think. But he was putting videos up on YouTube about the relationship from a narcissist and a codependent, and how it's like a perfect mating match, and it totally makes sense. And so here's his book. It's called The Human Magnet Syndrome. I
It's how
highly recommend it for males or females, whoever's going through this.
it's like how what both they do enables each other
Yeah,
to
it's like,
continue.
that's why he calls it the magnet, because it's like they attract like crazy, because, you know, the narcissist needs exterior validation. The empathic person gives it. And so it's good. But what happens is that narcissist starts abusing the empath, and the empath's going, wait a second, I didn't sign up for this. And so if you don't have strong boundaries as an empathic person, you're in for trouble. You're in a world for hurt, because if you don't put your boundaries up, and I was never taught these things growing up, that they're going to get stepped on, you know, in friendships, you know, relationships of any kind, family, work relationships.
I find
So,
that narcissists are controlling, and they just have to have
huge, huge
control over
controlling.
everything and
Yeah, they're
oversee everything.
trying to
So if you
control the
want to
net.
interject any kind of something for you, have something to share, oh no, that's got to
Spot
be all
on.
about
Yeah,
them and what they think. And the minute you question that at any level, oh, then it's on.
oh,
Then
exactly. Oh,
you
it's
become the
insane. Yeah.
enemy.
Then they're
Not
like,
the
yeah,
right.
spot on, Trisha. That's it. They're controlling the narrative of the story they've made for themselves, separate from the reality of what is that we all normal people live in, whatever you want to call it. They create a like they create their false self. They'll start making false realities and rewriting history, you know, and that's part of the gaslighting that they'll do. They'll say, oh no, that never happened. Or I'm like, no, shoot, do I have to videotape everything we do and everything you say? It gets to be very crazy making, and it really distorts your reality and throws your sense of self out of whack, because you're trying to sort through it rationally with an irrational person that has this disorder, and there is no rationale with, you know, dealing with that type of situation. So yeah, it was rough. And so that's, you know, a couple more traits to watch out for is, um, Number 3 on here, trait number 3 would be manipulation. They manipulate, you'll see them manipulate people, with lying again, and to get their needs met, to get that narcissistic supply, they'll, like we're just talking about, they'll create their own reality and shovel it onto people. And if people don't know about the disorder, they take it for gospel. They're like, oh, okay, that's what happened, and that's what it is. When in reality, that never happened. So manipulation and being exploitative too. They'll exploit you too.
That's where the covert part comes in, right? I'm tapping in because I have that going on in my family. Some of that dynamic
Yes,
you're talking about,
and it happens everywhere. Yeah, they'll
under the
exploit you,
radar, way of doing it.
and they want to make you the bad person. So what they'll do exploitatively is they'll push your buttons to where you blow up, and they'll say, "Oh, look, that person's whacked out," So,
Yes, and they'll do it in a way in public sometimes too, so that they can prove that you're the one with the problem. They know you have an emotional trigger, and they'll poke at that, and then you react, and they got you. That's when
absolutely.
The minute you're upset or triggered, they get to turn that on you. See?
And they're absolutely, and they're very keen on reading people. Because they've had to mimic for that false self that we talked about earlier. So they've really mimicked, body language, and because of that lacking inner self that they've rejected, they're trying to, be, like the rest of the people. And so,
and in that, they'll pick up on your insecurities.
Yes.
And play on those.
Absolutely. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head again there, Trisha. They'll play on those insecurities. They'll exploit them.
Use them against you.
Use them against you. Like if you open up, like say, hey, this and that happened, in my childhood, or they'll use it against you,
Yeah, they'll act all loving and caring, and then they'll get you to open up, and then they'll
stab you in the back.
Yes, for their advantage.
Absolutely, for their goal. They always have these goals, and they're so competitive too. So yeah, manipulation, projection. When you really get into this is why the disorder is so, there's a lot to it. They will project their ugliness onto you. Like they will say something that they're doing, and they'll say that you're doing it, but in a big way. And then the gaslighting we talked about, distorting, it's mind games, and it was crazy. Like an example, you were talking about gaslighting, or doing examples that I could give. So gaslighting would be like when I was married, my ex-wife would say, "Oh, I'm going to the store," and I'm like, "Okay, cool. Could you pick up, a 6-pack of water or whatever?" And and so then she'd come back. I'm like, "Oh, hey, you got that 6-pack of water or whatever?" And she'd be like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "You said you were going to the store," and I said, "Oh no, I was going to pay a bill or something." I said, "No, you said you're going to the store. You're gone for, X amount of time. And I just figured you'd pick up some water. Where's water?" Just life stuff, And so you're just left there going like, what? And so it plays with your reality.
Passive-aggressive? A bit of,
it's passive-aggressive to the bone. Yeah,
yes.
Passive-aggressive to the bone, man. And so, and then it got to be so crazy. I was like, and this is the crazy making, we'd talk and some of that stuff would build up. I'm like, do we have, like, what are you doing, man? Do I have to like video everything, And this is like way back in like 2007, 2008, all this craziness was going on. And so, anyway, so that was another thing, another trait to watch out for, power and control. They're addicted to power. Passive aggressively, they'll do it behind the scenes sometimes if they're a covert narc. Covert meaning hidden, smear campaigns. If you get on their bad side and you're like, hey, you're doing ABC, whatever, they're like, they take offense. Instead of trying to work it out, they're like, you're just the bad guy now. And they'll start saying,
making stuff
up. Even if you're not doing anything, they'll make stuff up, and they'll start telling they'll tell anyone. They'll start telling neighbors, friends, family. I mean, the boundaries that they're such boundary crossers. Like they have no limits, and that's why we have to make those boundaries
for
with
sure.
people, in general, because we
The
don't know if
kind of
they're
stuff they would do is like what this specific family member would bring up, the fact that I was molested as a child at Thanksgiving dinner, things like
horrific.
that are
So
like,
horrific. Yeah. They'll do stuff.
whoa,
Yeah.
embarrass you,
Oh, they'll, and
use
if,
whatever
yeah,
they can
because they know
against
it
you.
hurts you in your heart, and they get off on that, and that's when the narcissism is, because it's on a spectrum, the autism spectrum disorder. When they're that high on the malignant side, they'll do stuff like that. That is just horrific, and because they want to trigger, they want some reaction from you, and because that's how much they're hurting inside. They haven't resolved that craziness going on within themselves. So they gotta, how can I, it's horrible. So that's part of, the triggering smear campaigns. Another thing that they do is the need to be above or better than others. It's a real, they always, think that they're no matter,
Critical
they're
of
like just
others.
higher above, no matter, that we're all created equal in God's eyes. That whole idea goes out the window. So it's always better, got to compete. And, like life is this some sort of monopoly game or something. I don't know. Instead of working cohesively with each other and helping and being part of a group to be all better, it's all center, living in that tunnel, that bubble of their own, dysfunction. So we already talked about the false self to replace the real self. That, and that's the thing. If you'll notice that people with NPD, if you say anything, maybe about appearance or something, like in passing or nothing big, they'll like, whoa, because that false self has to be perfect, and if it's like you're attacking them, it's like, no, I'm just kind of playing around, and I'm a kind of playful person. I don't take myself too serious, it's like we're all in this life thing together. And so,
And
so
that's
yeah,
just like anything that you do. Oh, no, they can't have. It has to always be about them. Any idea that you're discussing at any time, just randomly, like if you introduce anything in a conversation in family gathering or social gathering or whatever, they don't like that. It has to come from them. It's like they just have to control everything,
well, they want the
I find.
attention because that's where they
Yeah,
get the narcissistic supply. And if anything is they see as like in the material world is better, then they feel so insecure inside that they got, oh well, I did this, and well, I went to that vacation, which is like even more exotic than your place, So it's
exactly.
always this, they're
One-upping.
horribly insecure in their core self that they've cut off, that they've never worked out. And unfortunately, there's no cure for this, and the people that do go in, there's small strides made, within people that want to deal with this in marriages or whatever. Um, but yeah, there's no cure. There's some of the effects that they can work on, say, such as, you know, selfishness. Maybe they can be a little more giving, but even that, it's like a program.
And
It's
anything they do give is how they manipulate. They pull you in. When they give you, they want you to feel safe with them. So then you open up again, and that's when they stick it
And
to
it's
you.
a cycle.
It's a
Yeah, I had a
cycle.
friend like that,
Yes.
and it was just back, 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 back. And you figure, well, as we get older, I mean, we're pushing in our 50s now. You think that they would mature, grow, but when you have NPD, you don't grow, you don't self-reflect, and so
Introspection.
those,
No
yeah, so the same
introspection.
cycle keeps happening, and you got to let those relationships go because they're not healthy for you. They're not healthy for the more giving, empathic person.
I think this was so wonderful because so much of this is in the family unit. And we're taught to be loyal to family no matter what. And this is why the cycle has continued for so long, because when it's your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, you know, it's harder. You love them, but they're not good for you. And so, and we're told we have to be loyal to them over our own selves. And that's where the codependency part is bad, because it teaches the empath to put themselves second. And that's where the narcissist comes in. They got open season,
Yeah,
you
because
know, they're
you've been trained from childhood to react that way, and you bring it
yes,
into your adulthood and your adult life, and then your adult life blows up because, I mean, try
because we're
having them.
taught to not have boundaries. We're taught that
Exactly.
in order to get love, you know, we have to behave a certain way instead of having boundaries and honoring ourselves first. It just sets up that whole toxic
Amen.
cycle between the empath, the
Amen. Yeah, and
codependent,
that's
and the
that
narcissist.
right. And thank God for my faith. You know, I mean, that's what brought me through everything, and still to this day, I'm very close to my faith. And because you get to the end of yourself and you can't figure this out, and you know, it's just you have to learn how to love yourself. And I think trying to uh, redesign those old patterns, you know, it's challenging.
Patterns.
It's
Patterns.
old
You
challenge,
said,
and
yeah, once you get to 50 and you go, why does this keep happening? You know, what's the common denominator? Me. Then why do I allow it? What's that about? Yeah, you know, you go, this type of person keeps appearing in my life. At some point you get old enough and you're going, okay, you know, like, how do I get off
absolutely.
this Ferris wheel? You know, how do I get off the
Yeah, and
merry-go-round?
that's like I was talking about earlier, relationships. You know, after the divorce, I would go and I'd kind of, I'd be in these relationships that were, where people be on certain levels of the narcissistic spectrum. You know, they'd be at certain levels on the narcissistic spectrum. And my last relationship, I mean, I saw the red flags. My last relationship was 3 years, but I was like, she was only like so far on on the scale. I'm like, I don't know. But what happened was it just kept creeping up, creeping up, creeping up. And then, I had to stop it because um, it wasn't healthy for me. And I knew it. So, and I knew I was the common denominator from my marriage to this point. And I've been single for a long time. And so I had to stop dating to figure everything out alone. And that's where my faith came in, and studying even deeper and getting part of more groups, because I have a normal life to do along with NPD, that you kind of like vacillate back and forth. But these last probably 3 years, I've really focused on it and been part of groups and Facebook groups, which I would like to mention before we close here. I don't know how much
Absolutely.
time we have left.
I was thinking we go for an hour because this is such a big part of our
Okay.
society structure. I feel like, you know, or that I wanted you to be able to get all of your lists of topics. And then if you want to join me again, we can maybe talk about it and the more deeper particulars, the details
Absolutely. I would love to
of
come
this
back, and we can, instead of doing like an overall story, we can kind of pick out different,
aspects.
whatever
Yeah.
whatever works with your show. Absolutely.
Awesome. To me, I'm here for you guys. Everybody that comes on this show is not about me at all. I'm just so grateful that you're willing to come and tell your story. It's a very a personal thing, and I just appreciate you taking the time to do it because it's so important. We've talked about it. This is people need to know this stuff, that there's another way. We get to choose
Yeah,
another way, and our way out of this toxic way of interacting with one another.
absolutely. And and that's the thing too in the codependency, like Ross Rosenberg, psychotherapist, the book I showed earlier talks about, um, that I lost my train of thought.
I know there's because
I got like all these
there's just
thoughts
so
going.
much to it. But anyways, we could go back to your last point on your list of things. I think that's where
Okay.
we were at last night. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to throw you off. I hope I didn't throw
Oh,
you off.
no, no, that's okay. Um, with yeah, that'll come back. But I wanted to also talk about, now that the awareness has grown so much. I mean, we've got, even in Los Angeles over here, Rebecca Zung. She's an attorney that specializes in divorces. And had I had the money and been able to hire her at the time, and even still, because you're still dealing with, you have a child with someone with legal issues, I would have hired her. And so now we have attorneys that know how bad this issue of narcissistic personality disorder is. And they're out there because people, narcissists are pushy. They get their way a lot of times. And the more empathic people get steamrolled over in life, financially, emotionally, they get their lives just destroyed because of that control factor we talked about earlier. So yeah, Rebecca Zung, her last name is Zung. Watch some of her videos on YouTube as well. And on Facebook also, they have groups that these are like lifesavers, because I've actually counseled. I'm not a counselor, but I help people through these groups and through people I know personally that have been affected by NPD abuse, through how to get through it and
Navigate.
deal with it best they
and
could.
Get past it, even if you can.
Yeah, like I helped my cousin. She ended up marrying a guy that was a narcissist, and she was going to lose her house. And so I said, okay, this I could, because she was telling me we were close, and so she was telling me what was going on. So I'm like, okay, this is what you got to do. And so she ended up saving her house. She's got an awesome boyfriend now, thank God.
Oh, that's great.
And she got away from that mess. And then I've helped a couple other people. And one of my close friends, she had a parent, her mother was horribly narcissistic, and she's like 2 years narc free now. She's the wife of a friend of mine, and she's a Christian girl, and just a nice person I've known since junior high school. We grew up as punk rockers together. So yeah, I like to help out. It's like I feel like I should be serving the community for what I went through. I'm still going through. Like I said, who knows? They need that narcissistic supply and attention any way they can get it. And when they
too.
Yeah, when they have that money, and she inherited a bunch of money, she could take me to court till I'm like 300. I just have a small business that I run, so I'm like, I don't want
Can't
to
suck blood from a turnip. Yeah. But I'm with you. I mean, I'm doing this for this very same reason. I mean, that's why I just feel like everybody has wisdom they can offer others from their personal experience with the same situations. And that's what we're doing here. We're helping people to know they're not crazy, for one, and that there are resources out there and people that want to help other people like us, that want to share the wisdom we've learned from our life experience and help another person from what we're learning.
Amen. Yeah, because you'll feel isolated. I felt, because I didn't understand the disorder, what was going on. I felt like I was a ton of bricks came down on me on my whole life, and so that's where these communities, especially on Facebook or other ones online, but I focus on these ones because they're easily accessible, and they got tens of thousands of people globally, that suffer from this, this disorder, and so I've got a list somewhere over here of the groups. So
Oh yeah. Well, we got a few more minutes here. About 10 more minutes here.
Would it be okay to put those on, you think?
I would love that. That'd be great.
Okay.
As much as we can get out here, and then we can see where we want to go from there.
Absolutely. I put a star by the ones that I think are the most important. I've got a list of 11 here, but there's about 5 or 6 of them that are really helpful. And once you learn about the disorder, then you can kind of take your life back and understand how to get your life back and heal and go on with your life. from the craziness. So these groups, I know that the girl I was telling you about earlier, she's like, oh my God, these groups are so good because they get involved, and now she's helping people, So it's a chain reaction.
Yay! I
For
love
the
that.
good of humanity.
Yes.
Not for the hidden destruction.
And so on and so on. Hopefully, like you're going to be doing your show. You're going to be doing,
Yes,
this is wonderful. I just think this is great.
yeah, I'm going to be working on my show and a portal so people can kind of go. I've always had this idea where depending on what they're going through, be it legal, emotional, whatever, I want to make a website portal where survivors or people that are dealing with these issues can go to
resources
for information to get their lives back in healthy town, not in crazy town. So some of these Facebook groups that have helped me are Covert Narcissism group. That's one group. For me too, a lot of us survivors have codependency that they don't even know they have. And especially guys, we're kind of like, we don't want to deal with that stuff. But for guys that have gone through ex-wives that are just crazy, like, have this disorder, there's a group called Codependency Recovery Support for Men is the name of the group, also on Facebook. That's a smaller group, but very helpful as well. And also, if you have kids with someone with NPD, this group called Co-Parenting with a Narcissist, that helps too, because you got to know how to deal with these people. Either you can't show emotion because once you do that, they got you. Any way they can extract narcissistic supply is they'll do it because they feed off of it like a deep sea diver needs oxygen. Down at the bottom of the sea. So
for sure.
Another group is Narcissistic Abuse and Codependency Recovery with Lisa A. Romano. That's Romano. She's a life coach. She is so well versed in this disorder. I'm still learning from her, and she's awesome. Also, Narcissistic Abuse Recovery Support Network is another group. By the way, these groups are all private. Your NARC person cannot get in unless they go through the shield and answer all the questions and whatever. So don't worry.
So it's a safe environment.
Then it's private. You can kind of heal in the private until you're strong enough to go and depart, or even if you've already departed and are in the healing process. All these groups are very beneficial. So that's a big group, Narcissist Abuse Recovery Support Network. That's got like just under 50,000 members, and Narcissist Negotiators with Rebecca Zung. That's the legal help side of it. She's located in LA. It's kind of minimal, but she gives a lot of good legal advice for people that need help in divorcing. People have an NPD, male or female. NPD is not gender specific. Girls have it, guys have it, both. Yeah. So, and then the last one I want to mention here is the biggest group. It's called Narcissist Support Group, and that's on Facebook as well, private group, and that's just over 61,000 members. So it's a big, pervasive disorder that
people are starting to catch
a problem
on.
Yeah, and even in our culture, especially our Western culture, we perpetuate it, with materialism and competition and fighting against each other. When there's healthy competition, nothing's wrong with that, but when it's it gets nasty, and that's no good. So we want to be all joined together and live happily with each other and not have all these problems. That's the goal, right? So,
that's the goal. Yes. Yeah. And the most important thing, well, I don't know if it's the most, but the thing that is for people to empower themselves. They can take their power back and make better decisions, understand why they make decisions, where they come from. That's what's so wonderful about this work is, you can't fix the other person. You know, the first place to start is with yourself, and how you get yourself in these situations. That's what I love about this work. That's my favorite
Yeah,
part.
amen. And yeah, you can't fix narcissism, guys. Let me tell you,
Yeah.
if you're,
Can't save them.
you can't, because this is a unfixable thing. Their brains are already wired. I've seen brain scans where the anterior insula is not, popping off to that connects to the empathy. So that's why narcissists can't process the empathy of being in someone else's shoes. That's why when the abuse comes, people are like, oh, it's like, well, their brains don't work,
That
like
way.
that.
They don't have,
Yeah.
it's a different, and really, we can't change anyone anyways. I mean,
No, I mean,
if
who
they
wants
want to
to?
change, they have to want that's on them. And so the great thing again about this is that you can move away from that, trying to force the situation when, I mean, you can't bring somebody somewhere they don't want to be. So then the only thing you can do is what
Amen.
you can do. And that to me is very powerful. And that's what we're doing. Anyways, I
Yeah,
think I
and
repeated myself.
that's the codependent tendency, is to want to go and fix, and but I think that's where, when you do the research and you read these books or go into YouTube videos with these people that specialize in this, you get armed with the knowledge, and like, wow, I didn't know what I was getting into, obviously when I proposed, but if more people are armed with the information to see the tactics before it gets too deep, before they get, their whole lives involved, or having children, and then, the better off, because, these people, they're very destructive, and it's hidden, it, behind the mask of perfection, and this actually, it's diagnosed in, this is the DSM-5. So that, just to let everyone know, we just didn't pull this thing out of our
We're not
hat.
just talking, we're not
Yeah,
just out of our life experiences, but there's study and research being done on this topic.
Yeah, this is what psychologists use for diagnosis. It's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for mental disorders. And I have it tabbed, I have it all highlighted, so I can learn about this stuff, because I have a child with someone with cluster B NPD, and you got to know, unless you know what you're dealing with, you can't go to a battle with a butter knife.
Yeah.
You need
Yes.
an atom bomb or something.
Yes.
Especially
And
with something like
then the
that.
great thing is understanding yourself, and that's just
It's
huge
a
to me.
process. It's a process, Trisha. At first you're just mad, like, why is this person doing it? Then you start learning about it, and then you're like, that's kind of why they're doing. Wow. And then that takes a while to settle in, and then you're like, well, what's my part in
am I
it?
doing it? Yes. Yes.
Yeah, then you're like, what's my part? And then you're like, oh shit, well, okay, well, all right. And you kind of go back into your past and like, yeah, I kind of like let all this stuff happen. Yeah, I didn't really think it was a big deal. And then you like see all the patterns come together, and then you get acceptance, forgiveness. You go through like this like grieving process, and now I just like I see people that have this, and by the way, I'm not a doctor or anything. I'm just a average person, but I've done enough study that you just want to avoid them. You want to avoid the people, because they're always scouting. They're looking for their next meal, and
That's
that's the
excellent.
scary thing, is it's hidden all behind a smile and normalcy and
false exterior. Yeah. Yes.
yeah.
I love this. Thank you so much. This is huge. I mean, I just think it's wonderful. There are no accidents. Just by some thing we reconnected, and we started talking about this, and here we are. I just think this is so lovely. Thank you so much for taking the time, because we're heading up on the time here, to do this show with me. I would love to do more. Of course, that's up to you. I would love to hear more about what you have to say and what you've learned on each of your points if you want to, whatever, it's up to you. I mean, I'm just very thankful that you're here. You just shared a ton of information and resources for people to go to, which is huge.
I tried to
And I
squeeze
thank
it
you for
all
that.
as I
And
could with the
into an
story.
hour, yes, it's because it's
Yeah,
just there's so many layers to this work. So on many, many levels, codependency and all that. So if you would like to move and do another, maybe a few segments on whatever topics you want on this particular, I would love it.
absolutely.
So
Yeah, I mean, we could get into the parenting part. We can get
perfect.
into, the person dealing gray rocking and trying to, when you're actually dealing with a narcissist and how you can protect yourself. There's quite a lot of different facets that we can, get into.
Good word, facets. Exactly. It has a
Yeah,
lot of
different
facets.
elements that we can, talk about so we can help other people, because if not, they're just going to be another statistic. And with people with narcissistic personality disorder, they just kind of mow over people, depending on where they're at on the malignant scale. And I think it's a good thing bringing it to the public.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me. And hopefully we will do another segment here and we'll just, let it go. I mean, I like this, we're just
Absolutely.
speaking from our
We will,
hearts and our wisdom and putting it out there for people to hear. They're not alone. You're not alone. Whoever's
you're not
struggling with it,
alone.
you're not
Yeah,
alone
all
and
the
you're not
stuff,
crazy.
you're not crazy. Learn, learn, learn. Because
Go
once
out and
you learn
research.
what you're dealing with, everything starts to make sense. It wasn't you. It was what you're. If you're, average person with some empathy in your heart, it wasn't you. If you're a narcissist, I don't know what
Absolutely.
to tell you.
Yeah, right. We'll talk about that later. All right. So thank you
Right.
so much, Rob, for joining me today. And I'll look forward to our next segment. I'm excited.
Absolutely. Thank you, Trisha.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.